Journey to Intentional Living is about finding the courage, the desire, and the freedom to finally choose peace. It's about recognizing that being okay with not being okay is okay. And if just barely making it through the day is all you can manage, then you are winning. This is my story. This is our story. This is our journey to intentional living. Hello, everyone. This is Journey to Intentional Living. I am Lachelle Conway, and I have with me today my brother, my classmate, Victor Walker. Vic is a father, and I'm going to keep the introductions really, I want him to, I don't think I can do him justice, so I'm going to let him introduce himself. But Vic is a father, he is a husband, his wife is here on set, baby True is here on set. He is a co-author, the co-author of The Morals, Adventures of King Ray Ray, and
What Will Little Jesus Do? And
is it what?
Mr. No No.
Oh, I didn't get what would little Jesus do.
Oh yeah,
Okay,
What Will Little
okay.
Jesus Do? Yeah, that was actually one of our later installments. But, yeah.
Okay. And he is the guest teacher for the 2020 semester at U of M Dearborn.
Absolutely.
So we have here Victor Walker. I want Victor just tell his story.
When I first met Lachelle, we were it was actually a class called Inside Out. Inside Out was a prison exchange program where 15 University of Michigan students were pretty much aligned with 15 offender or prisoner students who had met a certain criteria and decided that they would, go ahead and, participate in the program to learn different things about how sociology worked. It talked about the various different aspects of, a culture, community, social structures, and things that were placed, systems that were set in place within our society that would give us a broader insight into where each of us were, currently participating in life during that time. And it was I want to say it was weird. It was a very unique experience because at that time I had never experienced anything like that. I believe I had been incarcerated for approximately 10 years at that time, and we'll get a chance to discuss what I was incarcerated for. But when I met Lachelle, like I said, it was one of those things where there was someone. When all of the students came in, I could easily detect that they had been previously informed by an external source that individuals who they would be meeting under these circumstances were the nicest of people, and that maybe they should be a lot more cautious than they probably would normally be if they met us in the other circumstance. But Shell was cool. I could kind of tell like she was open to understanding what was going on with the situation as opposed to looking at it from a judgmental standpoint first. And there was a few other students who I got that same energy from. But for the most part, that program taught me a lot about how individuals in society had progressed since my incarceration, but also that everyone on the outside wasn't someone who would immediately look at someone such as myself in that situation as someone who would be negative. But going back a little bit from the I'll go back into a little bit of my childhood. So I grew up in a two-parent household. I was very curious and somewhat creative, I think. And I think that I grew up in a two-parent household. My mother, my father. I had four brothers and I had two sisters, and we were all pretty much taught to, get things how we wanted to receive them. In other words, we were not taught to just sit around and just allow things to take place in our life. We were taught the principles of educating ourselves to become the best that we possibly could be. My father was a foreman at Chrysler. My mother was a stay-at-home housewife. And so I had like somewhat of the best of both worlds because a lot of my peers didn't necessarily have two parents in their homes. And what I gleaned from that experience what was that I was somewhat of a blessed individual. Fast forward a little bit, I began to, my mom always taught me to do for myself, even though I was a child, to make the most out of your moments and try to do something productive. So at a young age, I learned to cut hair. I became a barber, and during that time, I was in, elementary school. I was, going to buy wholesale candy from the store, taking it to school, reselling it, and things of that nature. So I learned how to hustle at an early age. But fast forward a few years, I became a bit mannish, for lack of a better term, and I got involved with a young lady, and before long, I had a son. She was pregnant, and so she ended up giving birth to my son when I was 15 years old. Of course, uh, that wasn't the main thing that my mom had on the agenda for her, teenage son to be doing at that time. But this was what happened, and my mom and my pops, they supported me to the fullest. And before long, I was one of those individuals who had pretty much anything that I wanted as a child, and I wanted my son to have that same type of, childhood growing up. And so I kind of got off into the street life. I made some bad decisions, and ultimately, it cost me from living a life of selling drugs and um, just being in the streets and everything that came along with living in the fast lane. And I had mixed that up with having gone to college prior to me. After I graduated high school, I ended up going to college. I went to the DeVry Institute in Ohio, and I had planned to actually go to Ohio State, but circumstances due to me living the street life led me down a different path, and unfortunately, I found myself in a situation that most of us would prefer not to be in. But I accepted it wholeheartedly. I didn't want to at first, and unfortunately, I had actually was incarcerated for a crime that I didn't commit. But being as though I was incarcerated and was living a certain life, I had to accept responsibility for the life that I was living. I was incarcerated. I was incarcerated for kidnapping, felonious assault, and felony firearm, and a bunch of other charges that had to do with drugs. And during the time that I was in there, I was forced to recognize and acknowledge that some of the decisions that I had made ultimately put me in a situation where I really just didn't want to be in, and I didn't know how to get out of it. I was young. I didn't understand the law. I was just thrown into a whirlwind of circumstances that kind of placed me at an extreme disadvantage, and I ended up having to fight my way through it. But I did. I overcame, and ultimately, you see the individual that you see in the day, and I'm sure, some of the dialogue that Shell and I are going to, share with one another, kind of bring out some more things.
I think when you mentioned how when we first came into the class, the rule was we could not give last names.
Correct.
Um, we couldn't know your inmate's number. We couldn't know anything about you. But I think coming into that class, um, and like I said, growing up on the east side of Detroit, to a drug addict mom, pretty much raising myself, I felt like I could relate because I had been arrested before. If I never said it, nobody at U of M would know.
This is true.
But I know when I first applied to U of M, even after graduating with a degree in business administration, I didn't feel like I belonged at U of M. I didn't speak the language. I'm from the east side. And so it took me a while. How did you feel? But you graduated high school and you had some college before you went to prison. But how did being in a class with people who may not understand, well, he did it. I won't say that they were judgmental, but
Sure.
how did you feel as an inmate being in a class with people who don't look like us, for one,
Sure.
people who don't come from our social economic background?
Sure.
Did you come in with some reservations? Were you
Well, to be honest, I think I did come in with some reservation. I think I came in with a bit of apprehension because honestly, when the when we first received the applications and we were notified, or there was an announcement that this particular program would be available to certain inmates. There were criteria, like for instance, you couldn't have a background of CSC or criminal sexual conduct. You couldn't have a crime against children. There were many different criterias in which you had to fit in order to be accepted into the program. But they also did a thorough interview with each individual who applied. And when they did the interview, it was more so like a probing, and I became a little bit apprehensive then because I didn't want to be treated as a guinea pig. I didn't want it to be a situation where I was in a classroom with a bunch of individuals on the outside who had judgmental mindsets, and that they were there to pick my brain and analyze me, take information, you know, recycle it and put it out, you know, into the world for whatever projects that may have been derived from it, and ultimately make me look as if I was nothing but, you know, a piece of discarded material. You know what I mean? And so I definitely came into the program, you know, looking at everybody and trying to get my own feel for each individual, because in my mind, I play chess, right? I don't necessarily always play it on a board. It's a mental game to me. And so when I see other individuals or other pieces, you know, surrounding my main pieces, it ultimately puts me in the mindset that I have to protect, right? And then continue advancing so I can meet my ultimate goal. We were told that we would receive a certain amount of credits if we, you know, graduated the program, if we completed everything that was on the list. And that was my goal, but I knew that there would be, or I felt that there would be some obstacles in the way, or at least in my path, that I would have to overcome in order to get what I was trying to get. But ultimately, like I said, it turned out to be a really, really great experience. I met a lot of cool people. Actually, ironically enough, and even though they told us that, I can talk about this now, I mean, they actually told us that we couldn't, you know, stay connected, or we couldn't even connect from the beginning with the individuals who would be in the class. I think just genuine humanity allowed us to connect on such a level that regardless of what rules were set in place, you can't just erase or push to the side a genuine connection. You know what I mean?
It's funny that you said how you guys went through an interview, because just like they scrutinized you guys, and they did us the same way.
Sure.
We had to interview, and I felt like, for one, I felt good about the class because, again, coming from my background, I wouldn't want to be judged.
Sure.
And so what made me feel really good about taking that class was they did scrutinize us, and they did want to know, why are you really taking this class?
Sure.
If you're going in here for this purpose, then you won't qualify for the class.
Sure.
And I'm not sure who they turned down or how many interviews they had, but I know I remember sitting in the office and them just, well, what's your purpose?
Mm-hmm.
What is, what are you really, what are you going to gain out of this? How can you help this situation? If you can't help this situation, there's no purpose for you being in class. So we went through the same scrutiny, which made me feel really good, again, because I have people in a correctional facility, or had people in a correctional facility. I, had once been behind a glass door at night precinct.
Sure.
And so, East side night precinct.
Right.
So, knowing that, it made me feel really good that we were not, especially with the people that were in the class,
Sure.
that they were not come in and judge, and actually listen to understand, and not listen to be judgmental. So one thing I do want to ask, because I have not spent 18 years, so what was your lowest? I'm sure you may have had many, I don't know.
Sure.
But what was the lowest point for you?
The lowest point. You're right. I actually did. I had several lows. But I think it's kind of difficult for me to say which one was the lowest because I always found somewhere within myself that I could pull myself up. And I'm gonna be honest, I say this all the time. One of the main things that prevented me from staying at my lowest was that I never accepted the sentence that I was given,
Okay.
regardless of whether I was sentenced to 20 to 40 years in prison, and I never fully accepted that sentence because I knew that I shouldn't have been there for what I was incarcerated for. I think I had to balance it out in my mind, but like I said, growing to a point in my life where I was able to completely accept responsibility for actions and behaviors that I did display, which ultimately placed me in a situation to even be wrongfully incarcerated. But to answer your question, the lowest point, I can remember crying on a couple of occasions. One occasion I cried when my grandmother passed because my grandmother and I are like really close. Actually, our birthdays are on the same day, like close. And I can remember calling home and talking to my mother and her telling me, the bad news I had. She had undergone a heart surgery. She had had some health issues, medical condition that ultimately placed her in the hospital. She had to go to rehab and things of that nature. But my grandmother was always like one of the strongest people in our family. So in my mind, she's going to overcome it. Everything will be good. When I called home and I found out she had actually passed, it kind of crushed me. And I didn't know how I was going to actually deal with it, especially being so far away and even not necessarily not having the resources, but not wanting to request the resources necessary for me to go to see her in her final, resting place. So I kind of let that go. That kind of pushed me down a bit. I think another point was shortly thereafter where we had hired, and I say we because I was also incarcerated with my brothers, like two of my brothers in my case, for the same charges. It was a multiple offender case, but I had been denied access to freedom and denied my appeals at that time that my grandmother had passed about 15 times at that time. And we had coughed up so much money hiring attorneys who were pretty much just giving it to us or taking it away. Taking it away from us. And so that kind of placed me at an even lower point. Ultimately, it boiled down to me having to learn the law for myself. I got to the point where I had to study criminal law, commercial law. I studied admiralty maritime law. I studied everything that I could possibly study to get to a certain point where I felt like, hey, if they're not going to do it for me, I'm going to do it myself. Um, and then finally, it came a point in time where one of the most important individuals in my life left, and that was my mother. I'm fast forwarding a little bit, and we'll fill in the blanks, a little later. But for the most part, to answer your question, the lowest point I would have to say when I lost my mother. I lost my mother in there, and it wasn't so much that I lost her. I had at that time created through great trial and tribulation a substantial amount of resources for myself, and I entrusted certain individuals with those resources in the sense that I felt that no matter what the situation was, had I not or had I did, you know, uh, become successful in my appeal and come home, I would be able to see my mother if that was the case. And unfortunately for me, both of those things came to a halt when my resources were depleted by individuals I trusted the most. And when my mother passed, I was unable to actually go and see her in her final resting place. So I think that was like my lowest. You know.
So, what did you, when you were inside, what did, I mean, how did you pull yourself out of that? I mean, how did you,
That lowest point.
yeah,
Well, to be 100% honest, is that woman right there. She was with me. My beautiful wife Alicia. was with me all the way through it. I mean, even while my mother was in the hospital, going through her final days, which we didn't even recognize were our final days. She had just been hospitalized, and we thought once again, because the majority, well, I'll say pretty much all of the women in my family are very, very strong women, and they have overcome significant obstacles to the point where you'd be like, oh, that's nothing. She'll get over that. And it was kind of scary because my mother had overcome so many hurdles that it's like, okay, one of these she might not make it, and ultimately it came down to that one. But Alicia was there for my mother 100%. She was one of the primary individuals who conveyed information to me when I didn't have access to my mother. Because it was at one point in time where I used to call my mother like every day, and it came a point in time where her her ability to speak had diminished, and so Alicia would convey to me the various different signals and gestures that she may be making to indicate what it was she wanted to say to me, and so and afterwards, Alicia was there for me like all the way through the process of grieving when my mom's passed, and when she was buried, and just all of that. It was her, so I would have to say Alicia is the one who helped me through that.
So, Journey, we are gonna have Alicia on here because I feel like her story is awesome.
Sure.
Do you want to tell us, or should Alicia tell us when she comes on? How did you guys meet?
You want me to do it?
Yeah.
Okay, so here's the thing, right? This is really an amazing story. I'm gonna try to get through it as quickly as possible. I know it's an interview. And
No,
things
take
okay.
your time.
So here's the thing, right? I'm not a perfect angel by a long shot.
I don't think
right?
anybody is.
Right, right. So during the time of my incarceration, when I was still recovering from my, bad habits and, not so perfect behavior, there was a point in time when I had obtained several communication devices where I was able to reach out to the world, and I did this knowing that it was against policy, but to be 100% honest, I knew that there would be no other way or other alternative for me to create for myself resources and the reality that I would need in order to ultimately effectuate my freedom. So, and just to say this before we even get into it, Alicia didn't, she had no idea, and I apologized to her so much afterward because she didn't know, but it was one of those things that we ended up getting through, and ironically how it happened, it was ill. So anyway, during my time when I was, in the streets, Alicia and I came from the same neighborhood, unbeknownst to us. And ironically enough, I had heard of Alicia and had even seen her throughout the neighborhood way back.
Okay.
Like way back.
So before you.
Right,
Okay.
but I was
Okay.
younger.
Mhm.
She was younger. Ultimately, I was involved in activity that wouldn't necessarily be compatible with us, having a type of connection in that manner. Plus, she had a very, very strict grandmother, and wasn't that happening. But anyway,
Yeah, you don't want to play with grandma.
but to be honest, now
Right.
it's crazy and strange how it came about because
Mhm.
I would have never even known. So anyway, I wanted to put that out there as a precursor.
Mhm.
So during the time that I was incarcerated, and I felt like it was necessary for me to generate resources. Now I will say this: I always said that I would never sell drugs again, and I didn't. I held that was my word because that's what I felt ultimately placed me in a situation to become incarcerated. But I did utilize my talents and my business savvy to start businesses while I was incarcerated, and they were legitimate businesses. The only thing that was um, not legitimate about it was the fact that the MDOC actually prohibits individuals from operating and owning businesses while incarcerated. Number one, because they can't get tax money, but also, they feel that if we are not completely rehabilitated, then we may utilize those businesses and the operation thereof to, commit more crimes without giving us a chance. But that's another story. But anyway, during the time that I was incarcerated and I was running my businesses, I happened to be on social media, and I had become very um, savvy with social media during that time because, and I had to be very, very secretive with my communication devices because you're not supposed to have them. But I knew that it was necessary for me to
Wait a
communicate and
minute.
maneuver.
Wait, hold on.
Sure.
Can we say that?
What's that?
You,
Oh, I'm off.
you good with
I'm
that?
good now.
Okay.
I mean, like,
Okay.
like honestly, like I'm really, really good. And you know,
Okay.
I'll be honest. These are my experiences.
Okay.
These are things that have
Right.
happened. And I'm also no longer on parole, so I'm good.
Good,
I'm
good,
good.
good.
But and we'll talk about
Okay.
that too. But for the most part, I was in a situation where I felt like I had to produce financially in order to do what and achieve my goals. So long story short, I knew I was wrongfully incarcerated, and I had expressed myself on numerous occasions to numerous different individuals, executives, officials, pretty much not everyone, but many people knew about my circumstance, but was not in a position to effectively help me.
Yeah.
So what I did when I got on social media is I began to create my own following and begin to promote and express and put out into the world, into the universe, what was really going on with me. So I would operate through my own social media pages and things of that nature. And at one point I had created a social media page entitled the Walker Brothers Social Awareness Group and Freedom Group. And there were a lot of individuals who tapped into it. Some individuals who were familiar with me from my earlier days, as well as individuals who I had met over a certain period of time. And I also used to be active on just basic social media. So to sum it all up, get to it. One day, well, it was several days I used to be on social media, and I would see certain individuals on social media that I would follow because I either liked how they, expressed themselves. It was something about them that I liked, and I followed them. So it was this one young lady on Instagram, and her name was Miss Loving God, and she was really really beautiful, hands down. And I used to like a lot of her pictures and a lot of her quotes and whatnot, comments. And when I saw this one picture of her, I just listed every adjective I could think about to describe what my emotions was at that time, all positive. And without being disrespectful.
Right.
And what I realized during the time was that the young lady had a ring on her finger, and so it was like, well, I gotta back up off of that because I'm not like that. I definitely wouldn't want to intrude or put myself in just bringing more negative energy. But I did like her comments and posts and things of that nature. Wrong. So that was that. So one day I was laying on my bunk, and it was count time. And count time is when I normally wait to the office to do that. I'm just giving you the real, right?
Right, right.
I'm wait to the office to do their rounds, and so I can get on here and check my social media and everything. And as I was looking at the phone, I was on Facebook. I was checking my messages and stuff, and I saw I had an inbox from a young lady. Now this is Facebook,
Right.
and so on Facebook, and I opened the message and I read it, and it was like, hey, how you doing, brother? I just wanted to let you know that you have a lot of people out here praying for you. I read your story, and it was very enlightening and insightful. I just want you to know that peace be upon you and blessings and things of that nature. It was just like a real subtle, cool interaction. And I took it, hey, I appreciate it, sister. It's a rare occasion when someone could actually understand someone in this circumstance, and the dialogue went on. So it went on for probably about maybe 10 or 15 minutes, and I didn't want to expose myself, so I pretty much cut it short. It was like, I appreciate you reaching out. Maybe sometime in the future I can talk to you, and maybe dialogue and get to know each other a little more. So from there it went to, well, right before the interaction or the exchange ended, the last thing that she said was, thank you for liking on that last picture as well. And in my mind I'm like, I don't even know this chick. What are you talking about? Like, you know what I mean? What picture? That question mark, And she was like, all of my pictures on Instagram, Miss Loving God. And I was like, oh man, that was her. Because some of the pictures looked different, so it didn't really, I'm like, what? So then in my mind, I'm like, well damn, she's married though. Like, oh man, this is crazy, right? So I was like, what about your ring though? Like, I mean, I don't want to be intrusion. I like your pictures. She's like, oh no, I just wear that to keep
Deterrent.
Yeah, I wear that just to keep, individuals from approaching me or whatever. And I'm
Wow.
like, okay. You know what I mean? So it went from that to, us having a nice little dialogue. And as we, over a period of maybe about a week or so, we exchanged, words. And as she began to talk and tell me about more where she was from, I realized she was from the same neighborhoods. And it ultimately came to me like, oh, that was, oh man, and she's older now. And,
So you came back.
yeah, and we just kind of, began the dialogue. And, things happened from there. And I'll let her tell the rest of the story in another interview.
Okay.
But it actually ultimately turned into what it was. And it was a really beautiful thing. It was something that manifested, I will say, very quickly. And it was very, very genuine. It was organic. And it was something that I don't think that I was even ready for. I didn't expect it. But when it happened, I was ready for it.
I should have interviewed y'all together because now I want to ask certain questions. I'm gonna save it. Okay. But you tell me this. Did you know, and this is kind of off the subject, did you know that Alicia was gonna be the one?
Listen, I'm going to be straightforward, and we talk about this all the time. I knew Alicia was going to be my wife within probably 5 to 6 days.
Really?
I'm going to say
That
this,
is
right?
awesome.
I'm going to go ahead and put this out here, and I'll say it because I feel good about it. And this is something that, Alicia and I are actually writing a book, and it's called Love on Lock. And we have a few chapters that we put together so far, but some of the details of what I'm going to say is they're actually in this book, but I can reveal them now. So Alicia and I, when we began communicating with one another, I would say like maybe after the second or third day, we had so many things in common. I mean, and then she was like a very strong and assertive woman, and that's what really makes me feel magnetic or connected to someone. It could be because these how all of the women in my family were. It could be just because I'm an individual who likes someone who's going to challenge me. It could be a combination of all of those things. But she's one of those individuals who says what she means what she says, she stands on it, and that's just what it is. And as we dialogue, I was like, man, this girl is something different. But as we begin to talk and get, more information and exchange it, you know how you just feel something like, Alicia made me feel nervous when I spoke to her. I don't feel nervous about anything. And I'm just being real. Here I am, a guy sitting up in prison with all of these charges. I'm walking through here with all these, hardened criminals, and it's like, that's nothing. But I'm nervous about this young woman that I'm talking to, and not nervous in a bad way. It's just like, wow, like on that tip, right? So what ended up happening was we were talking one day, and I can't remember exactly what the conversation was, but I kind of like just zoned out from what she was saying, and I kind of just turned inwardly to my own thoughts. And I was like, I'm gonna tell her, but I was like, she gonna think I'm crazy. All these things running through my mind, like I'm a guy in prison. She just met me for real, and oh my God. And I was like, and take it back. We're not talking. We're texting because it's late at night. Right? I'm not supposed to be on this device, right? But and even then, those things kind of like enlivened me. It wanted me, even though I know I'm not supposed to be on this device. I'm sneaking like under the cover, like, you know what I mean? It was like I was in the world like a kid, trying to hide away from his mom, or whatever, But I was, we were texting, and I was like, I gotta tell you something. I was like, I hope you don't think I'm crazy. I mean, I'm sure that, the last couple of days, you should know that I'm not just someone who will just say anything, but I just gotta tell you, I mean, I love you. I don't know what's making me feel like this, but I feel like if I don't say it, I feel as though, I might be missing an opportunity that, probably won't come back again. And there was a long pause. I mean, so much of a pause, I was like, I done messed up. I was like, I done messed up.
Did you think you actually lost
I thought it was over with. I'm like, I should have just shut up. I shouldn't have said nothing, right? But then, about almost 3 minutes later, I received a message like, can you talk right now? And I'm like, can I talk? And I'm like, looking around, like, keep in mind, I'm in a dorm style setting. It's like 8 individuals in here, but a lot of guys sleepy. They got their headphones on, so I'm like, okay. So I turn my TV up a little bit, right? And I go out the window and I'm like, hello? And we dialogue, and she was like, don't feel bad. Don't feel no type of way, but I've been feeling like this for a while too, and I didn't want to say anything because I didn't want you to think I was crazy, but I think I love you too. And I'm like, on the phone, like, yeah, you know. But, it made me feel like, man, like,
Wow.
this is for real. This is for real. Because me, one thing my mother always told me, she was like, you never talk about things, but she told me, it's like, you never tell a woman you love her unless
Yes.
you really, really mean it.
I remember telling my son that.
Don't
yes.
ever
Yes.
do that. And I never would.
Yes.
So you never play with a woman's heart like that, because that can lead to some bad situations. And my mother was really, really about that life. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So when she said it, I listened, and I knew that what I was feeling was what I was feeling. It wasn't a situation just because, I'm incarcerated and I need love. Because actually, I wasn't even looking for any of that. I was more so focused on getting home, because I had been through some, bad, interactions with, prior and previous and other women from my past, and I was just done with all of that. But that scenario is how me and Alicia came about.
So, did you? Was there a time when you felt like, okay, your appeals, you're getting denied for appeals. This might not happen. Maybe I should let her go.
Well, to be honest with you, I said this to her on a couple of occasions.
And I know black women, but go ahead.
Yeah, listen to me now. Listen. At this time, it was 2014, September 27th. Ironically enough, we celebrate our dating anniversary this Sunday, which is 9/27. I actually got it tattooed on my wrist. It's 9/27/14. That was the actual day that she and I officially became one in our own personal opinion. But there was a point when, because I will say this, I have to say this, and she'll confirm it and maybe elaborate on it in her interview. But when it wasn't long after we exchanged to one another and expressed that we loved one another and things, Alicia was just straightforward. Like I said, she was just raw with it. Like, look, if this is really what it's going to be, I have no problem with it. She said, I'm going to put everything off to the side. I'm going to focus strictly on you. She said, we're going to talk every day. We're going to write and communicate on JPay with each other every day. I'm going to come visit you. We're going to do everything exactly how it's going to be, and that's what it's going to be until you come home. She's like, I know you probably never heard people say this before, this, that, other, but this is what it is. And if you're willing to, accept that and just be straight with me, then that's what it is. She was like, but there's one thing I'm not going to tolerate. She said, I'm not going to tolerate you playing no games. I'm not going to tolerate you cheating on me. I'm not going to tolerate none of that. She said, let me know now if you feel like, she's like, I know you've been incarcerated for a while. She said, it might be some things that you still want to do. It might be some things that you feel like you want to get off your chest or out of your life, whatever it may be. I'm cool with that. But let's just remain as friends. You take care of that, and if the time and the opportunity is still available, we'll make that happen. But that's something I'm not going to tolerate. But during that time, I was 100% cool with that because, contrary to what a lot of people believe in the life I lived and all that, I had never cheated on a woman in my life, ever. It was just something that I was taught as a child. Like, that's not what it is. Like, you got options. You don't have to do it. So anyway, I was cool with that, and that was pretty much it. So time went by, and Alicia's going to talk about this, but Alicia's a teacher. She's very well educated. She's a double master. She'll tell you about her education background, but she's very educated and professional, and she didn't have to have me in her life at all, period. So she made the sacrifice of what she was doing on a professional level to go back to school to learn certain aspects of criminal law and criminal defense in order to assist me with what my attorneys failed to assist me with, as well as also help me in a financial manner, as well as help me in an emotional and social and every other type of manner to make sure that I was in a good headspace to continue the journey. And I had received so many denials. It was almost, it was earth shattering on some of them. It was just like, because I knew the law, I understood the law. And what Alicia may have not understood at that time, I would be able to interpret it to her and show it to her and break it down and define it. And, you know, a lot of people don't really know that law is a different language than the English language. And
Yeah.
so when you get off into it, if you don't know what you're looking at, you'll become very confused. And it was at a point where certain of the cases that I was citing, or that she and I were citing in order to, you know, file within motions to get back on my appeal, they just didn't want to acknowledge it. Because had they acknowledged it, then that would have meant that my entire incarceration and my conviction was a farce, and that I should have been home, and they would ultimately have to compensate me for it. So in order to circumvent all of that, they were basically pushing me off to the higher appeal courts to allow other individuals to make a determination on it. And during that time, there were some very harsh blows, and it was at one point I was just like, well, look, baby, I'm still fighting. I still got a couple more appeals left. But I just want you to know, if at any time you feel as though you can't handle this, I don't want you to feel as though you're obligated to do anything. I appreciate everything you've done up to this point, and you know, we'll always remain connected in some way or another, but I don't want to hold your life up or make you feel as though, you know, you. She was like, I said I was going to do what I was going to do. This is what it is. My word is my bond, just like your word is your bond, and we're going to get through this. Just when we get through it, just make sure you uphold your end of the bargain. And honestly, from that point on, we just kept going. She'll tell you about it, and she'll go into her perspective of what happened. But ultimately, that's what happened, and she stood there to the end. One of her constant sayings to me was, I don't care what the scenario is, whether you have to do the entire 20 and get out in 2020, I'm going to be here for you, waiting at the gates when you come home. And that's what happened. We actually have a picture of that moment. Her walking out, holding the gates for me coming out, me walking out with my Foot Lockers, everything.
You got. I want to see that.
Definitely.
Can you bring it when you come? I want to see that. Definitely. Okay, so Can you walk us through that last appeal, the very last one, when you knew that? Just walk us through that.
So okay.
Did you think you were going to get the appeal?
Well, to be honest, it was very difficult to say, but I just knew that I already had it set in my mind. I said I never accepted the sentence. So in my mind, I was going to, I didn't care if it was 3 days before the actual time when they had scheduled to release me based off of what the judge sentenced me to, I was still going to be fighting. I had already made that determination in my mind. Nevertheless, there was a point in time when I had filed for an appeal bond. Well, take that back. During the time I was incarcerated and having received all of those denials, laws are constantly changing, and court rules are constantly changing. And by me having set aside the idea of hiring an attorney and letting them do all the work, and me actually studying and researching for myself, I was more in tune with each of the laws and the rules as they, you know, would be released and overturned and whatnot. And so it was at a point in time when there was a new law or a new rule of law that had became effective and retroactive immediately, and it was effective immediately. And when I became aware of it, the attorney that I had at that moment, actually I hadn't had an attorney. I had just fired the previous attorney. I ended up filing the motion on my own behalf, and they denied it. But I knew it was the real deal. And by it being retroactive and by it being a court rule, I can constantly file this motion as long as I could articulate exactly what it was that I was saying and put it in appeal form to demonstrate that even though it was denied, this is the reason why it should be reconsidered. I did that about 4 times. So finally one time they accepted it and they offered me a court-appointed attorney. The court-appointed attorney that they offered me was the same attorney that I had planned to hire in the event that I needed to. This lady's name was Rosemary Robinson, and to this day, I haven't spoken with her in a while. She begun ailing, so hopefully she's still with us. But anyway, so she actually had to come up to see me. She eventually came to see me about a month or so later. And I sat down and I explained and I expressed to this woman exactly what this law was, because she had never heard of it. She didn't even understand what it was that I was expressing to her, because it was the rule of law was so new. And a lot of times attorneys have a tendency to only focus on the things that they're familiar with and what they know. So to make a long story short, I expressed it to her. I came out on the visit with her. I brought all my documents. I highlighted certain portions and I gave it to her. She went and researched it. Come to find out that everything that I said was exactly on point. We filed the motion. I was right back in court. Went down to court and I expressed to her while I was in the bullpen. I said, listen, I have been taken through the ringer with so many attorneys. I've spent so much money. I would really appreciate if you could not only go in there and express to the judge that even though you represent me, I would like to speak on my own behalf to express and articulate what it is that I'm trying to accomplish. And she said, no problem. This is probably one of the first times in Michigan history that this has actually happened like this. She opened the opportunity for me. The judge, Linda Parker, she allowed me to stand up and speak. And when I spoke to her and I cited the court rules, I was rattling them off because I was so enlightened by it. Long story short, she ended up granting my new trial, right? However, it ended up, they sent it back. I was supposed to come back to court a month later. Somehow or another, they lost my entire file. They lost my entire file for about 4 years. And I fought, but had no one, this is prior to me meeting Alicia, no one was willing to assist me to help locate where my file was. When they finally did locate my file, which this is the time I had met Alicia,
Wow.
she helped me and contacted. She was like my feet. She was my mouthpiece. She was the one who was talking and operating and conducting on business on my behalf. She actually located, helped them, got them to locate it. And when they did locate it, so much time had passed that I had to refile new motions. And when I filed those new motions, it got denied again because they weren't even aware of what I was talking about, because some of the rules had become revised.
How convenient.
Right.
Yeah.
So to make a long story short, afterwards, when we got everything back to a certain order where I felt I was comfortable enough to proceed, I understood the dynamics in which that I had to have an attorney, but I still wanted to represent myself. So what I did was we ended up getting another attorney. We got the other attorney. He was a really cool dude. He was very open-minded. I expressed to him the same thing that I had expressed to Miss Robinson, and he was one of the individuals who was more snobbish. Like, oh, I've been doing this for 40 years. You can't tell me anything. And I'm expressing to him, this is how I got back. So that went on for a significant amount of time. I had arguments with him. I had threatened to fire him, all types of things, until he finally got it. Like, this is right.
Now, was he court appointed?
He was court appointed, but I ended up having to hire him on a contingency agreement, for lack of a better term, right? And so what I ended up doing was I knew that he was a good lawyer, but I also knew what needed to be done. And since he had opened up his mind enough to hear me and recognize and identify that what I was saying was accurate, he worked for me. He worked for me very, very hard. So ultimately, we ended up getting granted another opportunity to go to court, and it was supposed to have been for a new trial and for me to be resentenced, because what I had demonstrated over that time frame was that a new law came out, was People versus Lockridge, and that demonstrated that if a certain score was not calculated, or if a certain score that was calculated should not have been calculated, which ultimately gave me more time than I should have had. Even under the crimes that I was convicted for, I should have only received 4 years.
Wow.
Period.
Wow.
Period. So now I can actively and effectively demonstrate that even though you all gave me 20 to 40 years, I was really only supposed to get 4. But even on top of that, I have new evidence to demonstrate that I was wrongfully convicted. So now you're going to have to either let me go because you gave me too much time, or you're going to have to let me go based off the fact that y'all know this evidence doesn't support the conviction in the first place. So what happened, we ended up going to court, and I explained to this particular attorney at the same time, hey, listen, I want to represent myself. This judge just happened to not be buying it at first. I'm not letting you represent yourself. I don't care about the new evidence that you have. I'm strictly here to address the concept and the law of you being over sentenced. I said, oh, cool. It's a dead bang winner. Nevertheless, the new law was interpreted in such a way that gave the judge and the prosecutor the power to say, even though we wrongfully over sentenced you, right now as the law stands, I still can give you what I want you to have, and now you have to go to the Court of Appeals to make them make a determination as to whether I overstepped my boundaries or not. So now you want to push it to the edge. At this time, I'm 16 years, 17 years in. So I'm like, you know what? I'm not gonna argue. I'm gonna sit back and let it be. So I know that if he gives me the opportunity to be resentenced, they have to afford me what is called allocution. Allocution is an opportunity for the defendant to stand up in front of the court and address or express any last words that he has to say before the resentencing. They actually could have gave me more time than what I was sentenced to originally if they wanted to. But I took the opportunity to express myself in such a manner. I explained my whole history. I explained how I had been duped by attorneys, everything, without making it appear as though I was a victim. I accepted full responsibility for crimes that I shouldn't have had to accept responsibility for, but once again, I worded it and expressed it in such a way that, hey, even though I do not admit to these crimes, I admit to creating the circumstances that gave rise to these crimes, which ultimately led me here. And that's really all they wanted to hear. So long story short, the prosecutor basically just backed off after such, she was fiery. She didn't want to let me go at all. But they ended up giving me the opportunity to speak, and when I did, the judge looked me dead in my face and he was like, I've never heard someone come in here and express on their own behalf some of the things that you said to me, and I think you deserve another shot at life.
Wow.
Even after then, though, with the judge telling them, let this guy go. I was supposed to be released within 30 days. I still stayed in prison for another year and a half because the parole board still had jurisdiction over what the judge had ultimately given.
Wow.
So that was the end result of how I ultimately ended up coming home.
So did you was that how was that though? I mean, knowing, I mean, you had been in there what 16 years?
At that time,
years?
17 years. Yeah, 17,
So
17
knowing that, did they give you a time, or you just sat there for a year not knowing?
Here's the thing. This was January 26, 2017, 16, something like that. And I sat up in there and I said, you know what? I'm going to go back to the facility. I'm going to allow this to take place. Oh, conveniently, they lost my file again. When we got back,
you better stop.
The parole board lost my file, lost my court file somewhere. What they say, in a warehouse, in the warehouse. So that took about 4 or 5 months for them to actually find my file. And when they did, it was Alicia again who was constantly calling because I couldn't call. And when they did finally find it, they said, you know what? Okay, cool. We found your file. So now it has to go to the parole board. Once again, a history-making moment. I went to the parole board. Alicia came up as my representative. We sat in front of the parole board, Mrs. Melissa. I can't remember her last name right now. But anyway, we sat up in front of the parole board, and this woman listened to everything that I had to say. And they can't necessarily give you a determination to say, you're going home. But I felt confident, like, she gets it. Three parole board hearings later, I was still waiting to come home. I was the first person in MDOC history to have to see the parole board 3 times before I got a release.
Wow.
They called me back with new information. Well, what about this? Like, well, that's not even me. it was information that had nothing to do with me that was associated with my case. Then they called me back up there. Well, wait a minute. If you went back to the court and stated on the record that you didn't commit these crimes, then why is it that we should let you go? Because if you didn't commit these crimes and you're seeing the parole board, then how can we assist you? You have to accept the full responsibility. Well, I accept responsibility for what I did do. They didn't want to hear it. So after a while, I think that when they reviewed my case and looked at everything as a whole, they eventually said, you know what, we're going to give this guy a chance. But they still, literally right now, had I not fought and Alicia not been there for me in the way that she was, I would just be going to see the parole board right now. Right now.
And so your release date was, your original release date was what?
My original release date was February. You mean based off of what the judge had sentenced?
Basically, yeah.
Well, when the judge resentenced me, now keep in mind, he resentenced me to 6.5 years, roughly. At that time, I had already did 17 and a half. So I was supposed to be immediately released because I had already exceeded the amount of time that I had been resentenced to. But being as though it was in the hands of the parole board, they could say, well, even though the judge resentenced you to this, we technically have the power to keep you until this time, even though they really didn't.
Wow.
But when you're in the system and you don't have anyone to advocate, now keep in mind, once my time was up in the court, the attorney has nothing else to do with my case. He has no jurisdiction to go and say parole board, let them go, none of that. So I was basically on my own, and I had to, Alicia and I kind of fought for that until we ended up getting into it.
So it makes you wonder how many inmates are in there who are not as articulate, who are not as educated,
Sure.
who may be in the same situation,
Sure.
but just don't know how to fight it, or who they don't have an Alicia
Sure.
to help them. Do you see? I mean,
Well, to be honest with you, and I say this with all humility, and I don't like to take credit for too much of anything if I haven't just directly did it all myself. But I have guys who can literally attest, and maybe you might want to interview these guys, that will tell you that it was me that helped them get out of prison.
wow.
I literally have sat down and went over guys' cases with them, and helped them and shown them certain laws, even with them under the advice of their own attorneys, and going against it to say, hey, I don't care what your attorney is saying, this is what's going to help you out.
And I can see you doing it too.
I did.
I can see.
I did. I did.
Wow.
I did. And the reason why I did it is because I had enough, I don't even want to say bravado, I'm going to say I had enough confidence within myself to do that, because number one, I knew what I was reading. I knew what helped me to get out of the situation I was in, but I also knew the experience that I had had with previous attorneys who failed to acknowledge anything that I was saying when I was right all along. And so and I think the small successes that I did have, whether it be, getting motions granted or having an opportunity to go and see the parole board and the court, and basically operating on my own behalf in front of the court, they witnessed this firsthand. And so when I came back to tell about it and they saw the results and what took place, they were more confident in me to accept my advice. And ultimately, they ended up getting out of prison. It was like 4 guys.
Wow.
Yeah.
Do you still see those
Well,
guys?
3 of them I do. 1 of them I haven't, and unfortunately, I think he may have he's recidivated.
Okay.
It happens, but I feel like I did what I was called to do in that moment, and so I feel like I did what I was supposed to do. I did what I was supposed to do, and that's what it is. But ultimately, it really is a significant amount of individuals in prison who have very similar situations such as mine, but either one, they choose not to be as determined, they lack a certain amount of education, or lack the necessary resources to be able to create such a scenario that may be able to assist them. And just being real, I can't help everybody.
Yeah.
I can't. Some of the things I really just had to just set everything to the side, because you have a society within a society in prison, and sometimes individuals just have a tendency to have their priorities not in
Yeah.
order.
Yeah.
And as a result, they end up spending so many years in prison that they could have been home. And then when it's time, I'll say this real quick. I actually met an individual, a couple of individuals, but one specifically, and I won't say his name. He had been incarcerated at the time that I met him for like 10 years. I used to go to the law library all the time, and he would always ask me, why you always go to them? Them people ain't going to give you no action in the court. That's what they call it, action in the court. You ain't got nothing coming, man. You look, man, just do your time. And I used to just be like, serious, man? So, long story short, over those years, I ended up transferring facilities, and I ran back to him. And he's like, man, you still doing that? I'm like, yeah. And this is around the time when I was getting ready to go to court. And when I went to court, and ended up coming back, and I explained to him what happened, he really started, like, can you help me with my case? And it was really too late, because when he applied for his transcripts, it had been so long that they don't even keep paper transcripts anymore. They had lost everything. And so, and he had a life sentence. So he's ultimately in there for the rest of his life because he failed to acknowledge and be more proactive when it came to seeking for freedom. Yeah, it was deep.
So I know we got to wrap this up. And I
know.
can sit here forever.
Sure.
And maybe you can come back.
Sure.
Maybe you can come back because it's a lot more questions that I do want to ask.
Sure. Part 1, part 2.
Yes, we got to do. I don't know after Miss Alicia comes, we might have to, y'all might just take the show. Just go take Journey. But one thing I want you to leave us with is, of course, I asked you. I think I inboxed you this. You got to leave us with a favorite quote or a favorite word. And what does now, because you got to come back. You got businesses you got to tell us about. You definitely got to come back. But what does living on purpose right now look like for you? What does that mean to you? And then give us your favorite quote.
Okay, living on purpose means to me pretty much, like I said, one of my primary things that my mother taught me, maximize every moment that you have. Don't take anything for granted. And when I say maximize every moment, that don't mean try to do everything that you may want to do at one time. It simply means strategize, prioritize, and then, kind of move on the things that you can do or you may have the capacity to do. I think when you live on purpose, it means to not sit around and wait for something to fall out of the sky to you. I think it means taking your destiny into your own hands. I'm a firm knower, I don't even want to say believer, I'm a firm knower of the fact that your thoughts are the foundation to every aspect of your reality. And so if you have a certain thought and it is based on positive, constructive, and doable substance, then you can project yourself into that reality and take the necessary steps toward making it manifest physically. I think when you live on purpose, I think that you wake up every morning with whatever idea or thought or goal or vision that you have in your mind, and you take the necessary steps towards achieving it, no matter what obstacles may be in your way. I was always taught that when you want something bad enough, you figure out a way to get it, period. There is no other way to look at that. If you want something bad enough, you're going to get it. And if you really want something bad enough to get it, then you'll take the necessary steps to make it happen. And so when I say live on purpose, I really mean live on purpose. Don't live on an accident. Don't live off of someone else's words or thoughts or what their perspective is of you. You have to see what it is about you that you want and that you like and you desire, embrace it and move toward it. That's
Thank
how I
you
see
so
it.
much. Thank you,
Thank
Vic.
you.
You got to give us a quote.
Okay,
A
so
quote or a word. A quote
okay,
or a word.
I'll give you a real quick quote, and the quote was, again, my mother. I love this woman so much because, you know, I never thought that I would see the day when I could say, man, I can live without my mother. I just could not. I could never imagine that. But I see myself every day living through her with what I do because of all that she's taught me. But the quote, to make a long story short, my mother used to always say, if there's something that you don't like, change it. If you can't change it, change the way you think about it. And that's what I do. If there's something I don't like, I do my best to change it. And if I can't change it, I just try to see it from a different perspective, and hopefully I can work around it. Yeah.
So I want to thank Vic
Thank
Walker
you.
for coming out. Thank you, Vic.
No problem. Thank
Journey to Intentional Living. This is Lachelle Conway. Yeah, we'll see us back here next week
you.
with Miss Alicia, Mr. Vic's wife, and I am excited to hear from her and hear her story. This is Journey to Intentional Living, and I am Lachelle Conway. Have a good night.